Hello, everyone. Welcome to Queer Voices, Universities as Catalyst for 2SLGBTQIA plus advocacy and support. And I just want to give it one more minute and I'll start off with the land acknowledgement. So I'd like to begin this morning with recognizing the unceded traditional territories I have the pleasure of working on. This includes the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations on which the city of Vancouver is located. My name is Kirk Hill. I'm the moderator for today's event. I'm the Assistant Dean of External Relations for the SFU BD School of Business. I'm also co-chair of the SFU Queer Collective. The SFU Queer Collective was formerly known as the Queer Graduate Student Faculty and Staff Group. And it was started probably around 2017 or so, but during the pandemic, it sort of slowed down and we reformed the group this past year. We formed an organizing committee at the start of this year and have rebranded. The SFU Queer Collective provides an inclusive home for 2SLGBTQIA plus graduate students, faculty, staff, and alumni, and postdoctoral fellows at SFU to cultivate belonging, community, and queer joy. At the heart of our mission is a commitment to anti-oppressive values, the promotion of equity and justice, and the nurturing of intersectional solidarities. The SFU Queer Collective represents a vibrant and skilled network dedicated to resource sharing, collaboration, advocacy, empowerment, and the protection and celebration of our members and the larger queer community. Today's event is the first of many that we hope to host and provide over the coming years. If you have an idea for an event or for our community, please reach out to us on our email, which is queerc@sfu.ca, or via our website, sfuqueercollective.ca. So I want to start off with a few housekeeping notes to share with all of you. Please note that this event is being recorded and that the video will be posted to the SFU Public Square website and YouTube channel. Closed captioning is available on Zoom, which you can access by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. If you're having trouble hearing the speakers, please try increasing your volume and checking your internet connection. If you require assistance for audio, closed captioning, or any other technical issues, feel free to message the host and panelists. After the moderated conversation with our incredible speakers, there'll be a Q&A session with the audience. To submit questions, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom at the bottom of the screens. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. Finally, there's a few community guidelines that I ask you all to respect so we can be safe, honest, socially accountable dialogue together today. Above all, there will be zero tolerance for those who promote violence or discrimination against others. Anyone who incites harms toward other participants will be removed at the discretion of the technical team and moderator. Excuse me. We also ask that you don't assume pronouns, gender, knowledge based on someone's name or appearance. Please refer to people using pronouns they provide. And practice self-care in whatever you do. If you need to go take a break, please do so. Please approach this event with an open-minded and open heart. Ask questions from a place of curiosity and kindness and recognize that we're all here to learn. We want to keep this conversation healthy and productive. And with that, I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers for this morning and ask them to introduce themselves more fully. Jen Marchbank is a professor at SFU in Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies, as well as a former president of the Surrey Pride Society and remains on the board. Jen, if you'd take a minute to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Kirk. Yes, I am a professor in GSWS. My most recent projects have been on elder abuse in the queer community. I also work on trans and non-binary youth, and I'm currently on the board of Surrey Pride, once again, where I am Director of Seniors Programmes, and I'm happy to say that I'm running a Rainbow Seniors social programme.
Thank you, Jen.
That's enough.
Thank you, Jen. That's great. Jude Ma is our Out on Campus coordinator at SFU. Jude.
Oh, thank you. My name is Jude. Sorry, there was an unmute button that popped up. I'm the Out on Campus coordinator for the Simon Fraser Student Society. And then my background before that, I did my undergrad at UBC and I was an organizer with the Pride Collective, which was an AMS resource group. So basically the equivalent of Out on Campus, but entirely student run. And then I'm also from Alberta, and I think we all know that's kind of been a prominent province in the news lately with their anti-queer and trans rhetoric. Happy to be here today.
Thank you for joining us. Mackenzie Colton is the Director of Learning at EGAL Canada.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mackenzie Colton. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Learning, as mentioned, at EGAL Canada. So I oversee a phenomenal team of instructional designers, facilitators, research officers, working nationally to create curriculum and resources across a variety of different sectors, including within the schools, corporate businesses, government, healthcare. We try to do a little bit of everything everywhere. So hopefully can bring a little bit of that knowledge today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And Norma Liz is a trans activist and refugee advocate from Lebanon. She's a Vancouver area journalist, activist, and works for Rainbow Refugee.
Thank you so much, Ferric. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Norma. My pronouns are she and her. As mentioned, I'm a trans refugee from Lebanon. I moved to Vancouver in 2018, and I'm so happy to be here. I work with Rainbow Refugee. I started with Rainbow Refugee as a sponsorship coordinator back in 2020, and I'm now the communications manager. I have my background in journalism and communication arts, and in everything that I do, I try as much as possible to support queer and trans folks from the Middle East and North Africa. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for being here as well. So my first question is really around universities, and how can universities collaborate effectively with local 2S LGBTQIA+, or as I'll refer to as queer organizations from now on, to ensure that campus policies and support services are truly inclusive and responsive to diverse needs of queer and trans individuals? If you can you mention any specific initiatives or programs that have been successful in addressing the mental health and well-being of queer and trans students, faculty, and staff on university campuses, and how can these be scaled or replicated? And maybe if I start off with Jude and then Jen and then ask for Norma and Mackenzie.
Cool. Yeah. I think a big aspect of this, which in my head is kind of straightforward, but in practice is not always followed, is just to prioritize what queer and trans students, staff, faculty are asking for. At the end of the day, these are the most knowledgeable people. And so what their demands are, what their asks are, when they're pointing out the gaps in these systems, that's where the university should start with their policies. Again, in practice, that's not necessarily followed. In terms of specific initiatives or programs within Out on Campus, an initiative that had started before I came into the role was the We Just Need to Pee campaign. And so that was where posters were put up in bathrooms throughout the different campuses for SFU. Some of them were definitions of the word trans, and basically the campaign highlighted the need for trans folks to feel comfortable in bathrooms, that it was a normal thing, that this wasn't a big ask. It was just kind of can't think of the words right now. Yeah, it was just kind of one of those things where why is this being a politicized aspect? In terms of other initiatives out on campus, as a department of the Student Society, we have an overall budget that we divide up with things like programming, advertising, stuff like that. But one of the big portions that we have is for gender affirming products. And so some of you may understand that gender affirming products are quite expensive and quite inaccessible for a lot of students. And so through this, we are able to kind of bridge the gap. And so we provide things like binders, trying to think of what else, binders, packers, breast forms, things like that. And so again, they're all free for students. We're navigating kind of how much folks can take every year, but my personal opinion is I don't want it to be a barrier. We've also started like resource guides for students. My assistant has been really good with kind of navigating guides for legal name changes and things like that within the university. With my background, being part of the Pride Collective at UBC, because that was an entirely student-run organization, our scope was a little bit different. And so because we were all just students, we weren't able to do a lot of the higher end advocacy. And so a lot of our focus was on just creating a safe space for students. We really wanted to prioritize kind of bringing in joy, bringing in just support and safety. But again, from that, we had a limited budget. We were all just students. And so some of the things we had were discussion groups. Trying to think, we had something called Pride Week, which we had usually in January. And so that was just a week-long kind of string of events. Something that did happen after I left was the Pride Collective, mainly they had started, I think, the Trans Coalition, but they were able to advocate for and actually bring in gender affirming care to the student health plan, which was a huge success. It was quite a contentious topic. I remember kind of talking to some friends and some folks that I still know who are at UBC. But again, like, it was quite amazing to see them be able to bring that in. And so that is something that's on my radar and I'd love to bring in, but navigating that is tricky. It's not as clear cut as I would like. Yeah, I think that's all I can think of right now.
That's awesome, Jude. Thank you so much. Jen, if you have anything to add.
Not so much programming, Kirk, but just some history. As I mentioned, I'm a former president of Surrey Pride Society, and I'm still involved. And I found that every year that I've been involved, either the Surrey campus or the Vice President's Externals Office has been active in sponsoring Surrey Pride and having some kind of relationship there. Including in one point about providing student ambassadors to work at the Surrey Pride Festival. So that gives a message. And this year, the university through EDI are sponsoring the Masters of Ceremony and Mistresses of Ceremony at the festival. So this all sends out a message beyond the university audience itself, that SFU is an inclusive organization. And I'm really, really pleased this year that it's been recognized that the center of the university has to be involved, not just the Surrey campus or certain individuals within the university. So that's come forward. And I think that just makes it very public. It sends a message to the broader community that universities are involved on being open and inclusive and reaching out. And I think that's the kind of behavior that we would love to encourage to continue into the future. And I think especially here in Canada, for me, having come from working in other parts of the world, I feel that the universities are much more part of our local community here than they are in other, say, in Europe. And so that just adds to the importance of the institution reaching out and saying, this is what we're doing. But also, I think that the work that is done within the institution, the work that we are supported in doing, coming from Gender, Sexuality and Women's Studies. I have just recently completed a tour of every health authority in British Columbia, talking about how elder abuse looks differently and requires perhaps different policy responses or practice responses in the queer community. And that was funded by a Kickstarter grant from my faculty. So, having an openness and a willingness to recognize the type of knowledge mobilization work we need to do around issues that are perhaps not necessarily normative ones. I'm really grateful to my Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences for funding that. So that different ways that the university can engage.
Absolutely. And Norma and Mackenzie, anything to add?
Yeah, thank you. Not to add, not that there's any other major points to add to what you folks just shared, but we at Rainbow Refugee, we have a very, very, very strong relationship with SFU. We usually host a lot of events at SFU, and the relationship is through decades of mutual support and understanding and advocacy. We have the board of director, Sherilyn Jordan, who is a professor at SFU and who helped us with the relationship with being present. And whenever we have an opportunity to educate or share or support staff, just be more inclusive. I know, and as you folks mentioned, what you are doing is already you're way ahead other universities. And you implement a lot of inclusive practices in your work. One thing that I can add would definitely be training and professional development for staff when it comes to how to better support queer and 2S LGBTQIA+ newcomers and students. And as Jude mentioned, we know that in other provinces now, the conversation about unfortunately, the conversation about the queer community this year is not very positive. So having professors and having educators or teachers who are just showing empathy and inclusion towards students can really support a lot. It all starts in the classroom. It all starts in feeling safe when we are in a small room where we are here to learn more, so we want to feel safe and included. Networking and alliances that you are already doing with a lot of organizations, and resource sharing, whatever resources you have, if you can share with other universities or other small groups or committees to support them on how to be more inclusive.
Yeah. Mackenzie.
So many really great points already made. Jumping off a few of them too, with this idea that change takes a long time. And I think there's been some really phenomenal examples. Brock University comes to mind with their name change policy. They launched and created that pilot within less than a year. And so to kind of demonstrate really concrete examples of how when we have a solid group of people that are able to come together and uplift these ideas with buy-in from senior leadership, we actually can make these changes quickly in our systems to really ensure that students do feel safe. So to jump off of Norma's point too, just about the current climate in the world, knowing that this isn't a time to take 5 to 6 years to implement this. We have to act now, and we have to approach these challenges with a really strong mentality that we can make differences, and we're doing that for not only just students, but everyone that steps foot on campus.
Awesome. No, and I'd like to add, last year I sort of led the effort to get SFU in the Pride Parade for Vancouver in the first time, and once we got in with 5 weeks notice, Joy had already committed the president to be there to lead the group, and then Yabam, who's our VP people, I wrote her, and within a day I had an organizing committee of about 12 people, a communications plan, and the budget to sort of do everything. And so we've had pride flags created with SFU branding that are now used across the campus at convocation and other events. And Yabam's committed to funding the Vancouver Pride indefinitely, our participation in that. So I think the desire for the university to try to figure out how they can support us as well has been very evident to me. So it's good to see that sort of is forefront of their thinking right now. Sort of moving over to curriculum itself, is in what ways can curriculum development be adapted to incorporate queer and trans perspectives across academic disciplines, fostering a more inclusive learning environment for all students? And maybe I'll start with Jen and then Mackenzie, because you talked a little bit about that.
Well, I've been developing curricula for over 30 years. But I also have to preface this by saying I'm working in gender, sexuality, and women's studies. So the curriculum does incorporate queer and trans perspectives in most cases. But how do you do that? You have to do that in a way that doesn't alienate those who might be fearful of these issues. I'm not going to say hatred, but maybe fearful, have some trepidation. So it has to be in a way that, for me, it says this is just part of the curriculum that we are presenting. So I teach everything from a 100 level through to the mandatory feminist theory class for my grad students, and it's incorporated throughout. But I do think that despite some of the anti-SOGI stuff that we've been hearing recently, for those of you who are maybe listening from outside of British Columbia, along with Alberta, has a set of resources created by the Vancouver Arc Foundation by and for teachers in the K-12 system called SOGI, that's the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity. They're often misrepresented as being a curriculum, as if we are mandatorily trying to impose ideas upon children. But really, these are a set of resources that allow educators to have something to draw on if they wish just to be more inclusive and diverse and equitable in their teaching. So one resource might be something in English 8, which discusses literature that might have a same-sex element in it. Or it might be something in Math 10 that has a family structure where a child is being raised by grandparents rather than by their bio parents, whatever. These are a set of resources for teachers. And what I would like to see is that actually expand and come into the post-secondary sector, so that we have an economist who just normalizes talking about a household economy, which may be of 2 or 3 persons of different generations, or whatever. So I would like to just say, let's have more of that, so that you don't have to go to a gender studies class. You can be in, I don't know, marketing and say, how do we market to this demographic? So that it's there and it's discussed in every option.
Yes, I'll just add, there's a Professor Steve Cates, who's from our community, and his focus is on marketing to the gay community, or the queer community. So it's right up your alley, Jen.
Yep, yeah. More of it.
Absolutely. Mackenzie.
Thank you. Yeah, just to expand too on some of Jen's points, that's something that we're really proud of at EGAL, is starting those partnerships with universities to do just that, Jen. We've partnered with a few departments within various Canadian universities to support them, because a lot of times there is that interest, but not the capacity necessarily internally to execute it, or wanting more of the national lens. And when we look at what's happening within K-12, we have funding from the Ministry of Ontario, the Education Ministry, and that's something that we brought to them right away, is to outline, there are so many teachers or educators that say, oh, well, I just teach science, this isn't my area, I'll leave that to the health teacher, or I teach math. And so at EGAL, what we created is our Relearn and React series, which is 5 animated videos for grade 7s to 12. And they're across 5 different areas of curriculum, linked directly to Ontario curriculum, that are maybe a little bit outside of where you'd expect them. So for example, we have an animated video on queer love letters. We have an animated video on queer mathematicians throughout history, so that math teacher that says to me in an educational session, oh, I teach math, so I'll put a pride flag up in my room, but it's not in my curriculum. Now I can say, actually, we've created this video for you. Here you go. And here's a teaching tool along with it. So I think, just to Jen's point, normalizing it. And at the post-secondary level, also remembering for those instructors that there are queer and trans people that you're teaching to. Oftentimes when curriculum's developed, it's developed about a community, forgetting that community is often sitting in the seats that you're teaching to. And so how is that lens being brought in as well, that it's not necessarily just this outside community or this external group that we're talking about, These are people that are sometimes teaching the content, sitting in the first row, wanting to engage with it as well. And how can we include those voices in the teaching as well, and making sure that everyone's represented through incorporating different lens of intersectionality and various lived experience.
Awesome. I was going to say if Jude or Norma, do you have anything to add or comment on?
Yeah, I can add some. I always finding my journey in university was definitely kind of one up and down. I did graduate with a major in gender, race, sexuality, and social justice, but that wasn't the one that I started out with. So I actually originally was majoring in anthropology, and for a variety of reasons, I definitely came to the realization that it was a problematic major and just way of knowledge, etc. But one of the big reasons why I ended up switching was because I realized that all of the papers that I was writing, everything I was discussing, I made it about gender, I made it about sexuality. And while that does connect with anthropology, like it wasn't part of the curriculum. There wasn't a class specifically about that. It was all different views, but nothing was explicitly like, let's talk about gender, let's talk about sexuality. And so I had written papers on the history of Two-Spirit people. I remember one of the classes I wrote a paper about drag and how, especially in Vancouver, there's a really robust drag community and there's a lot of non-binary performers. And so how does drag and gender expression, like euphoria, all of that kind of stuff. And when I was talking to fellow students, they were like, how are you, like, this doesn't make sense. You know, this isn't the proper place for those kind of discussions. I don't understand like how you can connect. And in my head, I was like, well, I don't really care what you think. I'm still going to write it. And the prof ended up talking to me afterwards, and she had said this was one of the, like, her most favorite papers that she had read.
Wow.
And so I think, like Jen was saying, like we have always been there. We will always be here within these classes. And so why is it not a normalized thing? Like, you know, why does it have to be this specific section of something, or why does it always have to be gender or sexuality studies? Why can't it just be all incorporated? Why does there have to be a sense of like others and, you know, what is normal, what is not normal? And so I don't know, I think it's just important to make it normalized and accessible, because again, like we have always been there, we will always be here. We deserve a space in these classes. We shouldn't have to be able to talk about like ourselves and our journey or those close to us, and only be able to talk about those things within a specific major or set of classes.
Yeah, and just to add to what everyone said, inviting guest speakers and lecturers to the classes usually make a lot of difference. Yes, we can have inclusive courses, inclusive languages, but when they meet someone in person and when they hear the stories from the people themselves, a lot of them, they change their perspective on how they see SOGI education, like Jen mentioned, or trans backgrounds or non-binary stories. So I noticed from participating in few speaking engagements at universities or schools across BC, we go there and students can be a bit not open to ask questions, but then the minute we tell them there's no right or wrong questions, feel free to ask and whatever you want to ask. And if we feel uncomfortable to answer, we will let you know. Whenever we lead with this, it will give the students a sense of, okay, this is a safe space. We are working on creating a safer space for everyone. I can ask, I can feed my curiosity. So I believe inviting to us LGBTQIA scholars or activists and professionals to give guest lectures and participate in speaker series can provide students with a diverse perspective and maybe introduce them to new role models, because sometimes some students who are struggling with their gender identity or sexual orientation, all that it takes is to meet someone in person. When we read about something or when we see it on YouTube or on TV is not the same as meeting people in person. I know for a fact I understood my gender identity the first time I met a trans person in real life. And it was an aha moment for me. I'm like, yeah, this is who I am. This is where I belong. So it really helped. Yeah.
That's awesome. It just sort of emphasizes the need for safe space and education and exposure. And like you said, especially I feel for people in elementary school and high school right now, what they're going through. And so having the role models that they can see is so important. And I think that's something that is, something that we as part of the queer community really have the responsibility to do on a daily basis when we can, right? Considering the intersectional identities within the queer and trans community, including refugees and asylum seekers, how can universities work with local organizations to develop targeted resources addressing their unique challenges amidst socio-political climates? Maybe I'll start with Norma and Mackenzie.
Definitely working with local organizations to conduct need assessments, to identify the specific challenges faced to us LGBTQI+ refugees and newcomers, because the needs and the struggles or let's go with needs. The needs that refugees go through in order for them to access education or to access support can be completely different from anyone else from the LGBTQIA community. We can think of community advisory board. We can establish advisory board that includes refugees. When we hear from them, when we sit with refugees, when we hear their voices and ensure that all the voices of those directly affected are included in the decision making. When we do, for example, if I'm a student, I'm here on a student visa, and I can't go back to my home country. I need to trust my university that I can go somewhere and they will support me. Legal and immigration support is very important. Maybe the universities can partner with legal aid organizations to offer workshops and trainings, mental health and counseling services for when I see a refugee or when I talk to a refugee who can support me to deal with struggles that I'm going through, collaborate with local mental health organizations to offer culturally competent and linguistically appropriate counseling services. And then we talk about academic support and scholarships when we establish scholarships and financial aid programs specifically for refugees and asylum seekers to ensure that they have access to education without financial barriers. I know that a lot of refugees, they go through, if you are not a protected person or you don't have a permanent residency card, you cannot access certain types of education or financial aid. And that stopped me on a personal level when I moved here from doing my master's, because I couldn't support myself as a refugee, not being able to work and go to university. So I had to postpone my education, put it on hold until I'm able to support myself. And building inclusive culture, we're talking about this since we started, but building inclusive campus culture, provide training for faculty, staff, and students on the unique challenges faced by LGBTQI+ refugees and asylum seekers, collaborating with organizations like Raymo Refugee. We go to a lot of universities and schools. Last week, I was at Charles West Secondary School just to talk about what queer refugees go through and what trans refugees coming from a trans person, what we go through when we move here, and inclusive policy development. We try to, as much as possible, ensure that university policies are inclusive and protective to refugees and newcomers. This includes non-discrimination policies, anti-harassment protocols, and accommodation for religious and cultural practices, and advocate for policies at the local and the national level that supports the rights and well-being of refugees and asylum seekers.
Thank you. No, I think it's so important. Both university policy and government policy align on this. It's interesting. I remember meeting a barber actually who was a refugee, and he said, you know, one of the reasons he came to Canada is when they stamped the passport, they didn't say refugee, they said, you know, like a visitor. So the way that Canada treats people is at that level, at least different than other countries.
And we what we do here in Canada as well, we have a lot of policies. We support refugees way better than other countries, but we still have a lot.
Way to go.
We still have room for improvement. We still need to do a lot. I work with refugees at Rainbow Refugee, and sometimes English is not their first language. 99% of them, English is not their first language, and they need to go to schools, but they can't access English classes because they don't have a legal status in the country, because they are still in the process of going to court or proving that they can't go back to their home country. So because they are not protected people in Canada. And this can slow the process of integration in the society and them finding jobs or pursuing education if they want to.
Awesome. And Mackenzie.
Just looping back to something Norma said earlier on in your response about partnering with community organizations that have that expertise and experience with the community on and off campus is also knowing what your plan is beyond just addressing the direct need that you have. So whether that's a policy or a resource or, you know, hey, we need training for this group of teachers or professors, knowing is this an urgent plan to address a specific need, but then how are you building this out over years to come? Because oftentimes where we see programs or just general campuses fail is they want to address an urgent need and they check the box and they think that's going to solve it. But this is a larger systemic issue that involves partnership that goes beyond just, you know, a Pride presentation or a Pride celebration or a policy development. It really goes into a larger equity and diversity strategy that those organizations can be invaluable to support through. So knowing when you approach those community organizations through those partnerships is having that dialogue about, okay, this is the immediate need today, but how can we build this out together to make sure that it's a fruitful partnership that isn't just checking a box.
Great. And Jen and Jude.
Thanks, Kirk. I have been working on refugee newcomers and new Canadians for a number of years. I have done several projects, academic projects. So one of the first things I would say here is that it is possible to make partnerships. So I did it on an individual level. I have an upper division class, which every time I deliver it, I reach out for a real world research project. So through that, I've worked with Diversity, which is the Refugee and Settlement Agency in Surrey, through which we were able to prove that the number of settlement services for LGBTQ folks in Surrey was precisely 0. And from that led to Better Together, gave them the justification. So there are ways that you can do these individual partnerships. We can bring it into our curriculum. We can say, here are my grad students and their expertise. We can actually say, what work do you need to be done? But my other thing that my work has shown me over the years is Canada's really, really good at marketing. We market ourselves as this queer-friendly place. Then people come, and as Norma says, they don't necessarily all come as protected persons. A protected person is, for those of you who don't work in this area, is someone who already has the status of a refugee. And they come with the status of being recognized in Canada. But the majority of the people I've spoken to in my work on LGBTQ refugees have been people who have come to Canada on a visa to do some informal work, some short-term work, or on a visa to come and learn English. They are here without the status that gives them any access to things like Work BC to support them finding employment, without any access to things that give them the rights. And often they only know that they can claim protected status is when they find Rainbow Refugee. It's not even when they go to any of the more formalized refugee and settlement agencies. My work is that my research has shown that most of the people who are working in the settlement sector are wonderful. They are so into supporting everybody equally, but they don't have a specific knowledge of the barriers that are faced by refugee and newcomer queer folks. And that doesn't get mentioned. And there's a number of people I've spoken to who said, I didn't know I could claim status until I went to Rainbow Refugee. And by the way, Norma, I've worked in several projects with Charlene and Chris Morrissey and various other people. So one of the things I think universities could do here is universities can't say to someone, the government of Canada does not recognize your status, but we'll let you in anyway. So they can't do that directly, but the universities, through people like Charlene Jordan, can lobby. Academics can lobby for policy change. We can say, you know, we are experts. We have a little bit of authority to claim that kind of thing, and we can lobby for changes. Ideally, it would be changes that would allow people whose status isn't quite regularized just yet to have some aspect of immigration support, guidance, advocacy, whatever. So that's what my work has been finding, is that people come to Canada because Canada seems a safe place to be queer or trans. And yet they don't come with a regularized status, and therefore they hit that problem of they can't access work, they can't access education. What policy I would very much advocate for is to remove the right for employers to require someone to have 500 hours of Canadian work experience. I think that is something that would very much benefit many, many people, not just queer and trans folks, but it often forces people new to Canada to work for nothing to acquire the experience necessary to secure other employment. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
It's great, Jen. Judith, from a student experiencer, anything you want to share?
Yeah, I think being in my role, it's a little bit different. I think one thing I've noticed is that the onus is definitely on me. I shouldn't expect students who are already in a precarious situation to educate me. It's a lot of unpaid emotional labor. And so it's on me to educate myself in how things work in the nitty-gritty and how I can best support the students. And I think one thing I've really realized is it definitely takes a community. And so through that, it's definitely networking. It's educating myself through certain ways, but also just talking with coworkers. Like I have one coworker specifically who is really knowledgeable on a lot of this stuff. And so a lot of it is me talking to her and asking her questions. And then just through various means, it's kind of like having receipts of who do we talk to, who is the best person to go through, how, like, who can we kind of not ignore, but what hoops can we jump through to get the best results possible. And then I think another big way that I support students is also just letting them talk to me, like not being judgmental, meeting them where they're at. And so a lot of the times, they already kind of know that there's only so much like I can do, or it's kind of a waiting game. And so from there, it's not like I'm going to be like, okay, well, you have to wait for you have to wait X amount of time to figure out what's going to happen. And so then, I'm not going to support you. That's not how this works. And so it's just being a listening, being a space of safety and community and just listening. Also, another aspect is definitely, I've had a lot of international students who don't necessarily have the words to talk about their identity, talk about their sexuality or their gender, and they want to know themselves. And so that's also where I come into play is we all come from different places of learning. While I might be from Canada, like growing up in small rural Alberta, I didn't have the lingo that I have now, I didn't come into my gender and sexuality until I was in university. And so I think it can be really detrimental to students when we don't offer that space for learning. And so I think there's a lot of facets to this beyond just kind of can't think of the words. On top of what the three people were saying before me, like I think it's all very complicated, but not complicated, and
Yeah, it's sort of down to human connection, right? Great. I just want to go to more of a macro level. So with recent legislative changes in some provinces across Canada impacting queer and trans rights, what strategies can universities employ to advocate for the preservation and advancement of queer rights while resisting regressive measures, both locally and nationally? And maybe I'll start with Norma and then Mackenzie.
Sure, yeah. Unfortunately, with what we're seeing lately, one thing that universities can do would be official statements and policies. And universities can issue clear and strong public statements condemning the regressive measures and affirming the university's commitment to protecting to us LGBTQI plus rights, and ensure that university policy explicitly protect the rights and are in compliance with the most progressive legal standards. Lobbying, one thing that we talk that universities can do, active lobby on national level to protect and advance to us LGBTQI plus rights. Engage with policymakers to provide expert testimony, research, and data that support the case for to us LGBTQI plus rights. We can talk about definitely inter-university collaborations. Collaborate with universities to create a network that collectively advocate for the rights, share resources and strategies, and coordinate efforts. Establish coalitions that can collectively respond to the changes, and educational campaigns. If universities, if they feel like they want to better support, they can launch educational campaigns that raise awareness about the impact that some people from the community are going through. They can host training programs. They can go to creating probably legal clinics and services for people who are affected to support them better, and counseling and mental services. I always talk about mental support because it's very important when we're working with students who are probably affirmed in their gender identity and sexual orientation, or still struggling in a way or another to identify what they're going through. It's very important that they feel safe, they feel seen. It's very important that they can talk to someone who will understand them and probably share the right resources with them, guide them to organizations, guide them to places where they can feel safe. And one thing that we talk about as well is safe reporting mechanisms. Implementing safe and confidential reporting mechanism for instances of discrimination or harassment, advocating for and ensure that non-discrimination policies are being applied at the university, and making sure that we are listening to the students. We are here to support you. We are here to protect you, and how can we together work on changing some policies to make it better for you. Yeah, and thank you, Gabrielle, I guess, for saying, yeah, I'm sorry, unfortunately I have to leave in 10 minutes. But I have someone asked a question in the Q&A for me.
Sure.
Yes, Pamela, oui, je parle français et je communique en français, mais ça fait longtemps que j'ai pratiqué mon français. So yeah, it's been a while since I spoken French. Being Lebanese, we speak 3 languages, not because we want to, because of colonization. But yeah, I understand and speak French.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here if I don't have a chance to say that. Mackenzie. Yep.
Thank you. When we were talking and looking and seeing everything in the news about the policies and the pronoun policies and everything being introduced, specifically within Saskatchewan, EGAL actually did public polling, and we did some in New Brunswick as well. And we found that only 33% of Canadians personally know someone who is trans, and only 6% have a close relationship with at least one trans person. And that came from our public polling in Saskatchewan after the policy introduction and the talks about the policies. But we also know that when someone does know a trans person, they are less likely to support policies that are harmful towards trans people. And so this is why we really need to focus on representation across the board. We need to listen to stories and experiences, and it's a really important moment for people to educate themselves and turn to organizations who have queer and trans people at the heart and the front of them to understand these issues and be comfortable talking about these topics. There is still such a fear, and understandably so, sometimes with cancel culture and different things, but once we normalize these conversations, once we start talking about them, they become less scary. We've created our Rainbow Action Hub as a part of our Pride initiatives this year. And this highlights actually a lot of, I can't remember the official names we're calling them, but dinner table talks where, you know, if you're at a family Thanksgiving or anything like that, and a topic around this policy comes up, or a topic about washrooms comes up, or really anything, sex ed comes up, understanding how you can talk about this in a way that isn't too abstract, like it really is understandable and it's not a fearful thing, and it has examples that highlight queer and trans voices. The more people are comfortable talking about these things, my hope is that the misinformation can be eliminated, and some of the violence we're seeing can be lessened. So I think that's so important when we're looking at these challenges and these topics, especially around the pronoun policies, is just understanding what these things are, normalizing them, understanding we all can take action in those conversations. And then to Norma's point, really knowing where we stand and using our voices to say, you know, this is wrong, this is going to be harmful towards trans and queer students and kids and everyone really, and making sure that we take a stand.
Absolutely. Maybe Jude and Jen.
Yeah, I think kind of to just reiterate what Norma and Mackenzie were saying, is just oh, I can't think of what I was going to say. I think it's really easy for universities to kind of say that they prioritize EDI and that they're inclusive and that they're for the rights and supporting queer and trans students, but I think it's putting it into practice and actually acting on these in good faith. That doesn't always happen. And I think, I mean, I don't want to slander SFU, but also I think there is space, like there is a space for criticism, because we have encountered some issues with like the name changes and even the pronouns. And so again, we've out on campus, like we've been able to create some resources, but you know, even as recent as the end of last semester, I had a student come up and say that with an award ceremony, their dead name was used. And so, and we're kind of right now with all the budget cuts, the people that we used to go to and like to answer to these complaints to fix, you know, what's happening, they're either no longer here or they're at capacity. And so I think the university is definitely lacking, and I don't think it's able to really stick true to what they're saying in their promises, because just the reality of the situation right now. So it's kind of like, who do we go to? Where do we go? How do we make the university and the institution an accessible space when the institution itself isn't able to do those things or won't? I think a big thing too is kind of there needs to be action when, you know, there are problematic people. I think faculty especially, there's been, I think like have had students bring up problematic faculty, and I think there's definitely a sense where faculty can't kind of be touched, and that because they're at this high level, they're safe from whatever they do. And I think that is a really glaring issue. And again, it's kind of like if you're saying that you're these things and that you're for the rights and you're supporting queer and trans students, but then when you have people that you employ who are on the opposite of that and they're actively advocating against those students, then you really need to address that, and you need to follow through again on your promises and what you're saying, even if that makes you uncomfortable, even if maybe you don't want to do that, because again, at the end of the day, you can say all of these things, but until you actually put in the work and you act in good faith, how can queer, trans students, staff, and faculty really trust you as an institution?
Good point, Jen.
Well, everything that's been said is excellent. I would just add that as institutions, we should be not just making statements, but actively engaging and ensuring there is zero tolerance to homophobia and transphobia within our institution. And that advocacy that we do as an institution goes beyond Pride Month. We get a lot of flag waving, but what happens in December, right? This is constant. I would also say that, and this doesn't just happen to those of us who happen to be queer or trans, but it happens to any subgroup, people of color, whatever. It would be lovely if somehow in our equity, diversity, and inclusion agenda, we were able to address and recognize the pastoral or emotional work, those of us who are the receivers of those conversations that Jude's just been talking about, right? So in addition to my teaching and research load, I get disclosures from students. I get disclosures of violence, of hatred. I get called incredibly nasty names by others. So I think it would be lovely if we had a way where it would recognize that this isn't just an academic exercise, it's an emotional and pastoral exercise, and that takes a toll. And that it would be really nice to have that included in conversations where we're talking about even just workload or health benefits or whatever, that it's not just down to it, that there's some kind of recognition that this goes beyond Happy Pride.
Absolutely. No, I think this is one of the biggest challenges at SFU, as well as the whole post-secondary institution. And Jude, as you said, is with the budget cuts and everything that's happening, is the resources have just been dramatically reduced. So how do we address this? So it's a huge challenge for us. The final question is really around the increase in hate crimes and the changes that have happened. So the latest report from Statistics Canada noted a 64% increase in hate crimes since 2020, targeting individuals over their sexual orientation. Amidst the rise in hate crime targeting queer and trans individuals in Canada, how can universities cultivate allyship and advocacy against discrimination and violence, both within campus boundaries and the broader society? And maybe I'll start with Mackenzie, since this is a lot of your work.
Thank you. There's so many layers to this question, because there is the being proactive part, there is the responding in the moment when there is hate and violence, and then there's the support after, or how to ensure that those students still feel safe coming to campus if something was to happen. And I think the proactive part comes through education. We're even seeing with the rise in hate, pride committees, pride councils, Toronto Pride, Winnipeg Pride, so many different pride organizations looking at increasing safety measures for their festivities to protect queer and trans individuals that really at the root of it want to celebrate identity in those moments and want to celebrate community amidst such violence and harm in society. I think we can all agree that all people in our country want to feel safe and at home, and that there are people they can turn to and trust. And so being as proactive as you can to have those protocols in place for if there is violence. And that involves listening to some of those voices that are hateful and that are negative. And so how can we protect queer and trans folks so that maybe they don't take on that, but that those allies and those groups that want to advocate on behalf of the community, or alongside the community, I should say, are the ones that are taking that on. And so if we can learn and be proactive and say, okay, this is going to be an issue, or this is going to be an opinion that comes into this conversation, how are we going to prepare for that ahead of time? And that comes into the policies and procedures, and then standing by them. I think Norma had mentioned that in a previous response, not just saying we don't tolerate discrimination, and then when there is discrimination or when there is hate, either ignoring it or finding a loophole or saying, oh, well, that person didn't mean that, or let's give them the benefit of the doubt, like actually standing behind that. Because that messaging is so much more clear to the community in support of them, rather than a piece of paper that has a policy that really is useless at the end of the day if it's not being enacted in practice. If I think we saw some of the events that happened last year with Waterloo as well. And so really understanding that there was a lot that came out of that in terms of lessons learned. So again, collaborating with other campuses or other programs to learn about safety measures and how to implement those. And one of the other things that I would say is, again, creating spaces for joy on campus. A lot of times we talk about the rise in hate. We talk about the hate crime statistics. We talk about a lot of these things that are extremely important to acknowledge. And at the same time, it creates a very heavy presence around this community. And so really making sure that as much as we're being proactive and responsive to the hate, we are also putting just as much energy into creating spaces for joy and celebration for these communities that are facing this every day. And it's tiring, like it's an exhausting job. I hold so much privilege as a person, and yet in this position as a queer woman, advocating can be exhausting. And so to understand that we can't just put all of our energy into the hate, we have to put some of our energy into the joy. Otherwise we're all going to burn out. And to find those moments of pride and joy, and to understand and acknowledge the privilege where we can to take those breaks, but then also to uplift those voices that should really be celebrated, and find those moments to be proud within all of the hate that's happening.
Thank you, Mackenzie. That's well spoken. Jen and Jude.
Just thinking about those spaces of joy. That's one of the things that I'm thinking about. It was a campaign that we did at SFU a few years ago, where we liberate the joy was by being whimsical and funny, but making a really strong point. And this was not acting against anything of hate, but it was just about acting against assumed norms. We, the graduate students in GSWS, led a campaign to liberate toilets from their binary. And we occupied 2 sets of washrooms down in the AQ building on the Burnaby campus. And if you want to see the post, we still have the signage in GSWS. So sometimes I think one of the ways that we as a community can keep ourselves healthy and safe is finding those moments of joy, finding those moments where we can make a protest while still having fun. So on Saturday, the Surrey Pride Society had an awards gala held at City Hall in Surrey, and it was a gala to recognise 25 years of Pride activism in Surrey.
Wow.
The great night, fantastic. We had 12 people outside who were protesting the SOGI, what they called the SOGI curriculum. They were so disrespectful. They whistled and made noise through the Indigenous blessing. They were equal opportunity haters. And those people I will not engage with. And nor do I think anybody else should, because they're not going to change my mind and I'm not going to change theirs. However, the vast majority of Canadians do not hold beliefs such as that. And Mackenzie is correct that the more dinner table conversations that we have, that astounds me, Mackenzie, that the number of people who don't know a trans person. I think that is the number of people who don't know they know a trans person. I think that's more accurate. Yeah, so joy-focused events are lovely. This is Pride Month here in Surrey, and in the next 3 days, I have 5 joy-focused events that I am organising and delivering. And so it's not so much joy for me, it'll be exhausting, but making sure that there are opportunities for seniors, queer seniors to celebrate, for queer youth to celebrate. These are spaces that we have to hold up. I feel one of my responsibilities as a privileged person, I'm so privileged as a white person, as a professor, as a settler in Canada, is that I have to give back. And I think institutions of privilege, such as universities, can really help those of us, supportive us. And I do feel supported at SFU. But yes, and so if SFU wants to host a joy-filled event, you've done it in the past, I'm in.
Sounds like a good challenge for the SFU Queer Collective. I love that. Listen, Jude.
Yeah, I think a lot of the first part of this question, I touched on in the previous one. I think a big thing again is just the university acknowledging when we say that things aren't as they should be. I think again there's a lot of unpaid, obviously emotional labor on students when they try and tell the university that they're experiencing discrimination or hate, or they're being harassed, whether it be by staff, faculty, or fellow students. In conversations with certain folks within the higher echelon of SFU, there's a lot of I guess the wording of there's proper procedures in place, there's forms to fill out, there's specific complaints to be filed, and it's like, yes, there are, but then we've also had the folks within those proper, whether it be like residents or something else, say that, oh, we didn't receive these complaints. Oh, like they didn't come to me. And so whether it be that the files were started or they weren't, again, there's still kind of this gap between these things are happening and that being acknowledged by the proper, I guess, bodies within the institution. Again, I also think it's naive and really harmful to think that just because people maybe aren't making those complaints that these things aren't happening. It's a lot of onus on students to come forward and tell their story and to try and make that complaint or bring that attention to the institution again when it's kind of been made clear through a variety of means over the years, and maybe really relevant right now that the university doesn't necessarily have their back. And so I think it's really dangerous and harmful to assume that things aren't happening and to not listen to the people who, when they are telling you that these things aren't happening, or just because a student's not telling you this, if if Jen was to tell you these things, or if I was to tell you these things, or other coworkers, we're not making these things up either. And so if a student doesn't feel comfortable or in a place to tell you, and it comes from someone else, you still have to listen to that. You still have a duty to acknowledge and do better. I think in terms of like what Mackenzie was saying, within my role, it's a balance between finding joy and making space for joy, and then advocacy. I think we all kind of know that things aren't good, and that the world is kind of out to get a lot of us, or a lot of the world is out to get us. And so we need to find moments of joy. We need to have space of joy and care and community. And that's definitely where spaces like Out on Campus is really important and really special too. Like my time at UBC, while the Pride Collective was great, and I, that being part of that changed my life, it also was entirely student run. If there weren't students who were able to take up that work, which again was unpaid, emotional, physical labor, the Pride Collective didn't exist. So I think other universities, they have a duty, or like student societies, there is a duty to try and kind of bolster spaces like that, organizations like that. And definitely, like right now, there's still, like, in terms of specific programming, that's something that I'm still putting into place. I do think SFU is a really unique university just because, the main campus is up on a mountain. Not everyone lives on the mountain. And so figuring out programming that is accessible to everyone is definitely a little bit more tricky than when I was at UBC. But that doesn't mean that, these things shouldn't happen. But I think in terms of the right now, it's kind of sucks that Pride is in the summer because there's definitely a lot less students. And so I think it's really important to still prioritize maybe the events or the themes that we would do around Pride and resilience and things like that, and then have it when there's students here. Because like every student deserves to have spaces like this and events and programming, etc.
Awesome. No, I think, people who are the sort of feel it takes a lot of courage for a student to complain about anything. And so it's, this is doubly hard because they're working with their identity, and they're, it's not about just something someone's done, but it's who they are. That is really being a challenge. And that is really super hard on someone. I'd like to turn over for the next 15 minutes or so for a Q&A from the audience. Just to remind everyone that questions could be submitted in the Q&A function. And I think, is it Gabrielle or? Oh, here we are. Okay, thank you. Maybe the first question is, how would you respond to the typical right conservative rhetoric that universities are just liberal institutions? As a queer person, campus is so important as a safe space as I explore my identity. I always hear from the other side, the universities are just liberal spaces teaching kids to be queer.
Oh, if only we could. I mean, come on, this is the big we recruit. I have spent so much of my life listening to people saying, what are you trying to convert? People's identity is their identity. And there's, as the Conservatives have tried so hard to use in conversion therapy to try and take it the other way. I think to this is to be an empty rhetoric. I think it's just a straw man, woman, whatever, that's put up there just to. It's one of those conversations that arise. I think that needs Mackenzie's dinner table conversations to challenge it and just say, yeah, that doesn't happen. And I think that is the answer. Yeah, that just doesn't happen. That's about my level of willingness to engage with it. It's like, nope, doesn't happen. Not what's going on. Not justifying you with anything else.
Mackenzie.
Thing too, I will add, and I grew up and worked mainly within Catholic schools in Manitoba for the first part of my career. And so, similar things came up, and I would just share my own experience growing up in Catholic schools. There's a lot of energy and effort that goes into teaching people to be straight, and that didn't work for me. So if that's something that could be taught, you would think it would work the other way around as well. And so we can't teach these things. To Jen's point, these are components of who we are. And yeah, that usually shuts down the conversation pretty quick when you put into perspective like that. And yes, that will be, I think, part of our dinner table conversation. I had seen someone put a question in. I went to the Rainbow Action Hub, and I think we're redoing that section of the website, so it'll be uploaded soon. I was like, oh, maybe I just saw the rough draft version of everything, but it is coming, and there's several different topics surrounding trans identities, sports, various different school topics, and then some of the information about the policies as well will be uploaded there. So just stay tuned and keep checking back for that Rainbow Action Hub.
And Judy, any comment about the sort of conservative?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of it's a funny notion. I mean, it's sad and problematic that this is a really prominent one and that it kind of has always existed. But like Mackenzie was kind of saying, like I grew up in rural Alberta. Like I only lived there for 8 years, but I mean, less than 7,000 people reliant on the oil field. Like it was as redneck as you could probably get. And I mean, we had one teacher who was outright like, I don't like teaching sex ed. And for her, it was religious reasons. And so if anything, they were definitely teaching you how to be straight, how to be cis. But of course, they didn't use those languages because there wasn't anything but that. And again, like it wasn't until I came to university that I left Alberta that I was able to find these words and that I was able to come into my identity and actually think like, oh yeah, this was an option. This is who I am. And so while maybe university, like at least universities in BC maybe aren't that extreme like rural Alberta, I think I don't think they're just like liberal institutions. There's a lot of gaps in folks outright who are again trying to make the space or the institution unsafe for queer and trans folks. My brain just kind of rambled off. Yeah.
It's all right. No, I'll share. I grew up in Arizona, so I'm originally from the States, so I just apologize for the entire country right now. But that what's going down in the south and south of the border is just unbelievable. And I just so it's something that gets my blood pressure going. But so grateful to be in Canada because we don't have near the kind of issues that we have down there, at least as public as they are. So maybe we can change a little bit of topic. Can we speak more about co-opting of pride by organizations? Pride parades feel like advertisements now. How can organizations such as universities make sure they talk about pride year round, as Jen said?
Okay, as someone who organizes pride festivals and many other things around that as well, I'm going to say that we had a lovely compliment at Surrey Pride last year where people came up to us and said, oh, this really has a lovely community feel. And that's one thing. It's wonderful to have a community feel. Is the community going to pay for the celebration? No, you need sponsors. But the balance is making sure that your corporate sponsors do not take over the event. And they work with you, not through you, and for their own purposes. So Surrey Pride has, we have multiple sponsors. For the gala, we were sponsored by the Health Employees Union and Quantum Polytechnic University. So it's keeping a balance. I understand what you mean when you see float after float after float. You think, are you just pink washing your product, whatever? But for those of us who are working on these things, it's a balance. But we work with those who sponsor us. We have long conversations. We ensure that we are not just putting a gay pride stamp on their products, that they truly are doing that, and that they work with us throughout the year, not just pitch up, write a check, get a billing. And this is what I'll say is that SFU is a sponsor for the festival date. And when I pointed out that the SFU needed to come to more than one Pride festivity, that there are all 3 campuses and 3 different festivities, that was immediately acted upon, which is great. But the other part of the question, I'm trying to find it, has disappeared on me.
If you look at answered.
I think it's just that as institutions, we just have to also make sure that, we're using our place of privilege to ensure that Pride can happen throughout the year, and not just be flag waving. Kirk, I'm going to come after you. I want to know where those Pride flags are. And maybe they pitch up on campus more than just in the summer. As Jude was saying, let's do it when more students are around. And let's do it on all 3 campuses.
Yes. Any other comments or?
The other thing I would add to that too is if you are finding that the Pride parades are feeling more corporate, knowing that Pride Month, there are so many queer run events on and off campuses as well. Like it's not just Pride weekend or the Pride Day where the parade happens. There are so many, like I'm in Toronto, I live in Toronto, and there were things starting last weekend run by more grassroots organizations that may have campuses as sponsors or as partners, but they weren't necessarily campus events. So finding those queer run, queer organized events to attend outside of just the parade can be a really fun time. Also just to see different communities highlight what they see as Pride and what they want to celebrate as part of Pride. A lot of times it's all month long, and the corporate sponsors come out to play more so for the parade and less so for the month-long festivities.
Absolutely, Mackenzie. I've got my partnerships are with a queer elders creative group called the Quirkies, with the Surrey School District, with the City of Surrey Archives, and with the Museum of Surrey. And these are, all other organizations you can partner with. It doesn't always have to be someone who's willing to, and partnerships are not necessarily about money. It could be donations of venues or of time. And that would be, for me, that's the type of work that I'm doing a lot of, and it's unpaid community service, but that's, someone was asking about, what about any joy in my work right now? I get joy through doing that. I get exhausted, but that's where the joy comes from, is community service and putting on those events other than the parade or the festival, in addition to, and hoping that some of them are online so they're accessible to everybody. Like doing this.
Absolutely. No, and it's interesting now getting to know the Vancouver Pride organization. And I think 2 or 3 years ago, they had 8 or 10 staff. Now they have around 20, and they're really expanding their events year round. And one of the things at the SFU Queer Collective on our website is we're trying to put not just events that we run, but community events on. So if you're aware of queer events that are taking place any time of the year, please let us know via our email, and we'll put that up on the website so we can promote it to everyone. And I think this, one of the questions here, and Jen, you already answered, is, what's the source of joy in your work right now? And I'll say one of the things is getting the Queer Collective up and going again. It's been really one of the sort of most rewarding things I've done in 21 years at SFU, and made a huge difference to, should hope to make a huge difference to the SFU queer community and beyond. And Jude, you actually must have moments of joy.
Yeah, that sounded really, I think, I mean, a big thing is, I think just having students come up and tell me that, having the space, the physical space, and also just having like the support of out on campus has changed their lives. I think, again, coming into this role from my background with the student-led organization, I was really excited to be able to kind of tackle these issues from a staff point of view. And so even things as little, or what might seem as little as like furnishing the out on campus lounge, we were able to get over $20,000 to furnish the space and make it more like a home. And so there's actually times where we can kind of run into difficulties because we kind of have to like kick students out, which I always feel really sad and bad about, but it's like, trying to think. So yeah, like finding moments of joy through that way, just being able to have students feel comfortable sharing their story, and just also planning events. In my undergrad, we planned a big drag show that was at the end of like what our Pride Week was in January, and we had over 350 people attend.
Wow.
And we actually had one person who was photographing the event end up coming out as trans, and she was talking about how being in that space with all of those people, it was the gender euphoria. And so I'd like to kind of emulate things like that with SFU. Again, I think it's just kind of addressing the uniqueness of SFU, but yeah, there's a lot of joy in just kind of finding ways to bring joy to the students.
And Syrian, sorry, I'm not gonna get to your question, so apologies, because I think we need to sort of wrap up just to make it on time. But I really want to thank everyone for today. Thank you so much to Jen, Kenzie, Norma, and Jude. And thank you to everyone who joined us online. I want to also thank the SFU Public Square team, especially Gabrielle and Seth, and Caroline from the SFU Queer Collective for really organizing and putting on this event. You can stay in the loop with SFU Public Square's upcoming events by following them on social media at SFU Public Square across all platforms. Stay in touch with the SFU Queer Collective by following us at Instagram at SFU Queer Collective, and check out our new website, which the link is shared in the chat, which is sfuqueercollective.ca. The event was recorded and will be sent out the video as soon as it's ready. The other thing I want to let people know is that we are going to be holding elections in the next few weeks for the SFU Queer Collective for the co-chair position, as I'm retiring next Friday. And then we also are going to have some other roles as well. So stay tuned for your email. If you haven't signed up, please sign up on the email list, and we'll keep in touch. In terms of people ask for about events for joy throughout the year, that's really one of the things the SFU Queer Collective is up for. So if you have ideas, we're really open to that and would love to work with you on that. Again, thank you everyone, especially Jen and Jude and Mackenzie and Norma, and thank you, and have a great Pride Month and summer.